Chapter 6 After Effects. Your tier has increased by 1 level. Essence enhancement has increased by 1 level. Buzzing in his head. Some annoying fly caught in the web of his ears, maybe. Couldn't be that clean in there. There were no cotton swabs in here, and the other options were too unreliable that Lei feared he might break something crucial in his head should he try to work anything but a finger up in his ears. He shook and spat phlegm on the ground, his feet singing a painful song as he winced his way up to the table, clutched the edges, and pulled himself a foot, breath rasping in his chest. A look around the room let him understand that it wasn't the world, but his mind that had decided to go on a crazy number of spins. Fatty Lou lay snoring under the table, one hand caught between the hinges of the chair, his index finger seemingly had stopped midway reaching for the spirited fried rice. Deep breaths. Take deep breaths. What in the 18 hells or 6 paths of reincarnation had happened? Did they somehow overdose on spiritual food? Could it be that this was the legendary state that fell many a famous cultivator, chi deviation, the devil itself? No. Deviation would have killed us. This was different. The most sensible explanation was that their body couldn't take all that chi. Then again, Lei had never thought a simple dish would carry chi so intense that it'd leave them breathless. Everything, from the tips of his fingers to the nape of his neck, hurt like a bastard. Oh! But his feet were light as feathers. A step took him round the table and another out from the door where he breathed the fresh air, bathing under the blazing lights of the morning sun. Sun. Did we sleep through the night? That explained the bad taste in his mouth and his throat, too, parched like a cracked patch of earth that had been roasted under the blazing sun. What about his face, then? Lei sprung back into his house and raised a pot near his face to check if there was anything wrong within. A stained, exhausted face glared back from the pot's darkened surface. But other than the trails of blood dried under his nose, there didn't seem to be anything broken at all. He sighed out a long breath. That was a relief. Then he froze. The wok, the pots, and the plates, everything looked as though somebody had licked them clean. Not even a grain of rice was left on them. You brats. You're going to kill yourselves. He shot Fatty Lou one last look and decided not to wake him up. He looked too peaceful in this rather twisted state, so Lei pulled that arm from the chair and put it over on the floor. He didn't have in him to carry him to the bed. He had other worries. Yes, that was the reason. Outside, the sight of ruined houses and deserted backyards, bushes and weeds slowly consuming the once lively streets greeted him. He shaded his eyes with one hand and decided to check the system as he started. Name, Lian Lei. Age, 20. Class, Chef. Tier, Novice 3. Skills, Eyes of the Yellow Maiden. Cooking skills, Essence Enhancement, Novice 2. His right eye twitched when he saw the system's generous evaluation of him as a Novice 3 chef. Other than that, though, the new skill had gained a level 2, but Lei still didn't have any idea about what these upgrades meant. The skill must have become more effective, but how should he measure this improvement was beyond him. He didn't have dozens of spiritual ingredients to do endless experiments, nor did he really have a solid way of getting those. Fatty Lou's uncle in that brothel had said that he could only help them for this once. So that door had been closed for good. There were other ways, different ways, but Lei wasn't sure if it was worth risking his life just to work his way through a system he didn't know why he got in the first place. Some twisted joke or a prophecy, perhaps. But then, a prophecy about a chef didn't sound too realistic. He could see where things could go from here. The essence enhancement skill alone had the potential to turn his dishes into pseudo-medicinal pills, and he was sure he'd get more from the system as he kept leveling up. Does it matter why I got this thing? Can't I just use it? That sounded good, but the trouble was that it would mean that he had to be more than a mere stall owner who just wanted to spread a different culinary culture in this ancient world. There was always the risk of being collateral damage to some cultivator's nuke, though. The choice doesn't always belong to you. Not when some bastards can decide anytime that a mortal city will be a good place to sort their differences. That was what killed the previous owner of this body. A pack of stray cultivators. They didn't even directly assault the city but razed it to the ground as they passed by it. So in that sense, staying away from cultivators or anything spiritual was just a matter of perspective. If you're a delusional fool thinking that you could find a silent place by some mountain, then by all means you're free to ignore the reality of the world. It'd be hardly a surprise if the mountain I'd picked turned out to be some primal fucking turtle hiding from its arch-enemies. Lei sighed. It was probably foolish of him to think all of these things while still suffering from the side effects of that chi overdose. His whole side was screaming at him and his feet were sore and itching. Where are these kids? And why were these ruined houses looked all the same? Those children were few in number and never stayed in one spot, always changing houses to be safe from the thugs that frequented this place at night. But it also worked the same way against Lei, and he wasn't in the mood to check every single stone to see if they'd been dead or not. Well, we're not dead. And there was hardly anything left from those dishes. Don't think it'd be enough to kill them. Lei sighed. What a start to the day. He found them all curled up and up cold in some building that had its door jacked between two walls, wooden planks groaning lazily in the occasional wind that drifted down from the far mountains. That seldom breeze was the only thing that made the day bearable. Well, that and the kids were still breathing. Good, they're not dead. As he stooped under the beams and worked his way to the other side where about a dozen children lay sleeping on the cold floor, Lei sighed once again. Then something furry caught his eye, hidden behind a girl's arm. Its too pointy is jerking up at the sound of Lei's steps. You've even let the cat eat that. Lei didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he stared at this sight. I've spoiled you too much. Thankfully, old G wasn't here, or else Lei would have to listen to his blabbing about how these kids didn't know what was best for them, or how they would turn into thieves and thugs if he kept peppering them. Some were already thieves, but Lei tried to put a positive spin on it. They were kids, after all, and kids didn't know how to act in certain situations. Their brains had this basic logic that more often than not got them into trouble. But not you. You should have known better, you little devil. Lei leaned over to a boy who had a blissful smile on his face. His friends called him Snake, a name that suggested a sneaky and vicious thug that roamed the lands, but in truth, he was just a slippery little devil that prided in being not caught after all the things he'd snatched from the stalls. He had a round face, plump cheeks with dimples on them, and short, spiky dark hair. Lei reckoned he was 12 or 13 at most, making him the oldest of this bunch, and he knew how to look after them. Sneaky Snake, wake up, Lei poked him with his sandal, but the kid groaned and turned his side, pushing Lei's foot with his hand. That was rude and unacceptable, so Lei raised his voice, wake up, you brats. That got him some reactions as a couple of heads turned in his direction. A strange silence settled on the cramped space, broken by widening eyes and gasps as the children all stiffened at the sight of Lei. It's Lei, said one of them, a girl with long, brown hair who had the kindest eyes in the world, petting the black cat that purred happily in her arms. Looks like he's awake. Lei shook his head at her. Little Mai, just call me Lei. You don't have to say my name twice. It's more fun this way. Little Mai cocked her head to the side, gazing curiously at him. There were enough rice grains stuck on her cheek to suggest that she'd had her fair share from that fried rice, and she giggled as the damned cat licked them off of her face one by one. We were supposed to call him the heavenly cook, a voice protested as another child raised a finger to Little Mai's face. This brat was a head taller than Little Mai and had black eyes that glinted under the sunlight. Heavenly cook. Lei was amused and patted little Chow on the shoulder. He then knelt beside him and asked, who told you that? All the eyes turned to the same spot, where the only child still lay dreaming. Of course, Lei mumbled as he leaned closer to Snake, poked him once, twice, and when that wasn't enough, he stretched the boy's eyelids open and snapped his fingers at him. Wake up, little Snake. Big brother Lei. Snake's eyes jerked wide open, staring round at him. What are you doing here? That's my line, you brat, Lei said, scowling. Didn't we have this talk the other week? And yet you're still stealing, even from your big brother here. I didn't steal anything. Snake waved his hand angrily. Why, you were sleeping, and I thought letting the food go cold would be a waste, so we took it. Sleeping? That was one way to put it, but Lei didn't bite it. Didn't you all watch me cook those dishes? I saw you peeking from the holes, don't lie to me. Little Snake looked hurt, but he still dared to click his tongue at Lei. Nobody's lying, big brother. We watched you cook that dish, and then you dozed off with that fatty. What about you? Lei asked, rather curious about the effects of those spiritual dishes on these children. They didn't look different, perhaps a little more energetic than always, but that could have been the result of a full belly. Are you feeling different? Any pain in your stomach or anywhere else? All the children shook their heads at the question, with Snake inching closer to Lei and giving him a reassuring pat on the back. Big brother, I've always thought you're a simple cook, but turns out you're a real genius. Your rice even fixed Stone's stomach. He said it didn't hurt anymore. Little Chow, the so-called Stone, stepped forward and bowed as though a disciple before a master to Lei. His head nearly touched the ground before he stepped back, respect shining deep in his eyes. Are you sure? Lei asked. That dish near broke him and Fatty Low. It was a little hard to believe the only effect it had on these children was a good night's sleep. There had to be something, anything. When the crowd of shuffling heads gave him strange looks, Lei decided it would be best to rely on the system's magic. Why bother trying to get answers from these little devils? There was no trusting them, anyway. He focused on Snake, using the Yellow Maiden's eyes on him. Som Junjia, mortal, first step of the body tempering stage. Wait, what? Chapter 7, tense. Hold on, Lei said, pinching the bridge of his nose. That's not right. What's not right, Lei? Little Mai said. Look at his eyes, Little Chow muttered. They are glowing. He's really the heavenly cook, I told you. Snake swept them with an excited gaze, then turned to Lei and bowed deeply. You must feel exhausted after cooking those miraculous dishes, big brother Lei. Why don't you rest here? We can go clean your house if you want. My house? Ah, yes. Lei said as he stared at the other children. A shiver ran down his spine when he checked them one by one. You earn my mortal, first step of body tempering stage. Xianxia mortal, first step of body tempering stage. How Bolan mortal. He breathed a sigh of relief when it became clear that not all of them had become cultivators overnight. Only Little Mai, Little Chow, and Snake had stepped into the ranks of the body tempering stage, but they didn't look different. Most of them are still mortals. But what about these three? How did they become cultivators with just a simple dish? It wasn't quite clear to him how many minor circles he'd completed before blacking out, but he reckoned it must be around 3 or 4. So he couldn't be considered a real cultivator, not before he'd managed to complete 9 minor circles. Something about the roots, perhaps. Maybe unlike me, these kids have a real talent for cultivation. That sounded like a sensible explanation. Some medicinal pills worked in a similar fashion, after all. Once eaten, they dissolved into waves of qi that slowly expanded one's meridians, basically working as a replacement for the qi that'd normally be absorbed through simple meditation. Did you all try that fried rice? Lei asked. If there was one thing he'd learned from the last night's episode, it was that his fried rice was leaps and bounds above that normal enhanced rice in spirituality. Millimeter. Little Mai nodded as she scratched the black cat's fur with her nails. It was delicious. We all tried it. Then it's not the fried rice alone. These three are really something else. Do you feel any difference? Lei asked. He didn't know what he should do in this situation. He was by no means an expert on the topic of cultivation and certainly didn't have the experience to guide these little devils toward the right path. But let alone answering him, they didn't even seem to know they'd become more than mere mortals after eating those dishes. Granted, the body tempering stage wasn't a stage that turned simple human beings into mountain-punching, river-crushing forces of nature, but it did boost one's psychical abilities. Snake, lift that rock for me, Lei said, pointing at a rock that was thrice the size of a normal brick. It must have weighed at least 30 or 40 pounds. Nothing too crazy, but a 12-year-old kid should find it hard to lift such a rock. Rock? Snake raised an eyebrow at him. I can easily lift it, but what will I get in return? If you let me eat more of those dishes, then I can lift all the rocks here. Fine. Lei nodded, waving his words off. There was an almost crazed glint about his eyes as Snake stepped near the rock and tapped a finger on it. Is this the first sign of a would-be cultivation maniac? Am I witnessing a rare genius? Lei chuckled at the thought. This whole thing was so ridiculous that a part of him still thought he was in the middle of a bad trip. Overdosing on spiritual energy couldn't have been as simple a matter as dozing off. But when Snake raised the rock with 2 hands, barely straining, smiling up at him as though he'd lifted a nail-sized pebble, Lei understood that everything was way too real. "That's nothing," Little Chow said, staring him down. He huffed and puffed his way through the ruins of the house, found a bigger rock, dusted off its surface in the manner of a true weightlifter, and hauled the damn thing. "See," he said, his smile straining behind the big rock. "I can do it better." The two released the rocks and they thumped on the ground, rolling sideways, sending little clouds of dust up the walls. "Were you too?" Lei said, gulping nervously. "Always this strong?" Little Chow and Snake exchanged glances before shrugging. Snake then gave him a confident shake of his head. "I've never tried to lift a rock this big, big brother Lei. But can't say I'm surprised." "I've tried once," Little Chow said, eyes down at that big rock. "But it is my first time succeeding." Lei nodded. This sudden increase in their strength wasn't anything groundbreaking but was expected from a first-step body tempering stage cultivator. At the 9th step, cultivators could lift 400 to 500 pounds with ease, the amount changing depending on the manuals and practices they'd use in the process. "What am I going to do with these brats?" He sighed out a long breath. "There is the annual assessment of the Empire Zone, but that's still months away and only happens in big cities like Lanzhou. Every year the Eastern Chu Empire sent its guards and officers to the big cities to unearth the potential of the masses. The few children who had been blessed with talent and opportunity would get recruited either into the Empire Zone, academies, or righteous sects. But those spots were usually reserved for the children of the highborn folk and prominent figures of the cities. Lei didn't know if he could slip these little devils into the mix. His head throbbed with a budding headache as he considered all the possibilities. Though he didn't want to admit it, there was nothing he could do right now. He lacked the means and money to even find a house for these children, let alone sketching a real future for them. "I'll try to think of something," he muttered, more to himself than to the children. The only thing he could rely on was the cistern, and for that, he needed more spiritual ingredients. He turned and regarded each kid with a heavy gaze. "You don't worry yourself about us, big brother Lei," said Snake, his chin high. "You can count on me." Lei gave him a strict nod. "Take care of yourselves and stay away from trouble while I think this through." Then he trudged back to his house. Just when Lei stepped inside the house, a strong hand grabbed him by the collar, yanked him closer, and flattened his back on the cold wall, an elbow pressing tight into his chest. "Who are you?" Fatty Lou growled, his eyes burning with cold fury. What are you doing?" Lei said, caught backhanded against the sudden assault, flailing against the strong hold. "Put me down." Fatty Lou swept him a fierce gaze and stepped back, but didn't lower his hand as though he was ready to strike at any moment. The fat under his chin wriggled impatiently as he regarded Lei with blatant suspicion. "Are you insane?" Lei said as he shook his head to gather himself. He already had enough shit to deal with, and now this fatty was trying to kill him. "When we first met, what was the first thing I told you?" Fatty Lou frowned at him. "What did?" "Answer me." Fatty Lou raised his hand, glaring out into his eyes. "What did I tell you the first time we met?" "Why you've told me that I've not enough meat in my bones." Lei sputtered, the man's eyes almost drilling painful holes around his body. All the tension left Fatty Lou as he breathed a long sigh. "Good. You're really you, then." For a second I'd feared some demonic bastard seized your soul. Then he turned to the empty plates. "Now, can you tell me how in the heavens did you cook something like that?" "That's the thing I wanted to show you," Lei said, rubbing his neck. He'd figured showing Fatty Lou would be the easiest and most effective way for him to understand, but seemed he hadn't thought it through. Should have known I'd get a strong reaction. It's not like the place has dozens of chefs cooking spiritual dishes. "I thought I was going to die," Fatty Lou said, wincing a step back and leaning to the table, his face easing into a questioning frown. 5 minor circles. Do you know what that means?" "Oh no." 5 fucking circles, brother Lei," Fatty Lou said. 4 more, then I would have stepped into the ranks of the body tempering stage cultivators. I've spent years trying to sense the chi around me, but I have never been able to get a single whiff of it. Then suddenly you tell me you've something to say, then fry some rice that happens to be packed with all the fucking chi in the world. How's that possible? You have to trust me on this one, Lei said, scratching the back of his neck. The system and its screens were as alien as phones and planes for these people. Hell, even he didn't know what to make of it. Where and how? These questions are not important, Lei said. There was no point talking about the reasons where the result was what really mattered. This gift of mine can do that. I mean, can influence the spiritual ingredients used in a dish. If we can find more. So that's what happened the other day when you'd clutched your chest and crushed down at the stall? Fatty Lou asked. That's when this boon of yours appeared. He snapped his fingers. Just like that, eh? More or less, Lei said and smiled slightly. I think I've been struck with a sudden enlightenment. You know, like those legends that have all the lights and a faraway voice of some higher being whispering the grand truth into one's ears. On some level, this was exactly what happened to him. Though he knew he'd get something after completing that first mission, it had still been way beyond his wildest dreams. That makes sense, Fatty Lou mumbled as he started pacing around the room. You must have been blessed by heavens in some shape or form. I've heard such things happen to people. What did they call it? A fortuitous encounter, was it? Yes, that's true. This is a Dan Xianxia world, after all. Exactly. Lei pressed right away. Must be something like that. We can use this, Brother Lou. We just need to find a way to get more spiritual ingredients, that's all. Fatty Lou shook his head. You heard Uncle John. Those people won't sell their precious spirit rice to us. Even if they agreed to sell, we don't have the money for it. If you can convince Master Li to give us a loan, then... forget it. That old man's stubborn as a goat. He won't give a single coin to us, that stingy bastard. If we are going to do this, we'll do it on our own. A tense silence followed their conversation. Lei racked his brains for possible solutions, but the ones he thought of were mostly about money or might. With enough money, they could venture deep inside the empire, perhaps to an immortal city where everything was more or less spiritual in origin. But even if they could somehow make the journey without encountering monstrous beasts or stray cultivators, such a venture would cost them dozens of imperial gold. I've never seen a golden coin in my new life. The same was true for the Alchemist Guild. In theory, everyone could buy a medicinal pill from the Empire's Alchemist Guild. The former emperor himself had declared some years ago that the Eastern Chu Empire shall provide all its people the means to buy and trade such important sources. Though he'd probably done that to prevent the monopoly of certain cultivation clans and sects. That didn't mean the pills would be cheap, however. They were, in all things considered, heavenly treasures in the eyes of the mortal folk, things that they couldn't hope to ever buy even if they spent their lifetime earnings. Well, that might be an exaggeration, but a single body tempering pill cost about 3 imperial gold. Considering Lei earned about 30 to 50 copper coins in a good day, he would have to work for weeks to even afford a single pill, as the value of an imperial gold coin was about 1,000 copper coins. And this was on the account that such pills would be available in the Alchemists Guild, as they were often reserved for people with deep pockets and deeper connections in the right places. On the other hand, if they could find enough ingredients to boost their cultivation to the body tempering stage, then they could go straight inside the Adventurers Guild and become adventurers. There were all sorts of missions in the guild that didn't involve a dangerous fight or a life-or-dead battle against the monstrous beasts, as even city folk could put up their own missions with providing proper rewards. Hold on. Lei glanced at Fatty Lou. What if we post missions in the Adventurers Guild? Missions? What sort of a reward? Wait. Fatty Lou's eyes glinted. Don't tell me you're thinking of giving a spiritual dish as a reward. Lei nodded smugly. That's some generous reward if you'd asked me. We let the bastards do all that hard work, gathering the ingredients for us, and then we'll give them a portion as a reward. Ingredients? Fatty Lou frowned in thought. It's a good plan, but I don't think they'd find any spirit rice growing in a forest. And how does one cultivate spirit rice, anyway? What, you just blow your breath into the seeds, or spit on them? It doesn't have to be rice, anything spiritual would do the job just fine, Lei said, scratching his chin. I mean, I can even work with some spiritual weed. Nothing too crazy, just simple weed with an extra touch of the heavens. You think they don't have those? Fatty Lou shrugged. Yeah, no. I'm sure there are plenty of spiritual things in the Darkloom forest for people mad enough to brave its dangers. But still, we must keep your boon a secret if we don't want some bastard to know how spiritual your dishes can get. You're right. We need a middleman that'll post the missions for us, Lei said, staring at Fatty Lou. When his brother-in-arms didn't take the hint, the strange eye contest stretched for a couple of seconds before, finally, Fatty Lou jerked a thumb back at his chest. You want me to be the middleman? Fatty Lou's eyes were wide as saucers. You know I'm a rather famous butcher around this part of the town, right? You can ask all those ladies. They often say I give the strongest impressions, if you know what I mean. Lei almost rolled his eyes at that. I didn't mean you. Just find someone. You've enough shady friends in the town, no? Fetch one of those. Tell them we'll pay in coppers. Yeah, right. Fatty Lou scratched the back of his neck before nodding. Give me some time to think. I'll pay a visit to your stall tomorrow, then we'll talk about the details. With that, Lei sent him off and threw himself over to the bed. He'd fallen asleep after getting high on spiritual energy but didn't feel rested at all, and he had to be in good shape if he wanted to keep grinding the system with his dishes. Chapter 8, Honest Work. The sun beamed through the clouds, and it seemed brighter today than it ever was as people sauntered about the eastern square. Each one had their own story, regrets, and plans, but the only stories worth lending an ear to, Lei was thinking, belonged to the ones who had the courtesy to grant him a coin or two on this bloody hot day. He worked with brutal efficiency, hardly breathing, hardly aware of the noises that surrounded him. He let the coins pile in the corner as he delivered one bread after another, flashing that half-smile that had long since become a natural thing for him after all the years he'd spent keeping a front against faces he'd cared little to remember. But behind that front wasn't the usual fury or the cold emptiness gnawing at his heart, but rather some warmth and a good deal of nervous excitement that kept him away from focusing too much beyond the reach of his hands. Fatty Lou had visited him earlier today and told him that he'd bring a guy who they could trust the mission with after sundown. They were to meet at Swirling Frog, for Fatty Lou thought making the deal in a crowded place would let them keep away from curious eyes. Not like we are starting a drug business. Some honest work, that's all. But so long the matter went smoothly, Lei didn't mind meeting at a tea house or a dark shed by the lake. Though he must say, the tea here was rather strong and had a nasty kick about it. Perhaps that old, mute guy added more than just leaves to the pot before serving it to his regulars. 6 coppers, sir, Lei said as he smiled up at a wrinkled old man who gave him a cash coin with the word 1 engraved upon it. The man fumbled with the coin, seemed embarrassed for a second, and fished for some time in the depths of his pocket before flashing an additional glinting 5 cash piece with a trembling hand. Lei gave him a single copper after taking the 5 copper coin and a portion from the freshly cooked menemen, smoke curling beautifully over it. Now that they were taking the matter of cultivation seriously, he'd become painfully aware of how lacking his little stall business was. The whole morning had gone without him gaining a single tier or a level in the essence enchainment skill, and the coin pile started looking awfully short in height even though it was growing at each passing minute. 3 handfuls of spirit rice had cost them about 150 coppers. That was half the average wage of the masons and the carpenters in the city. The lucky few who earned their craft could make between 500 to 600 in a month, but that sum depended highly on the governor's office's unreliable tax practices. When Lei rented this little stall for the flat sum of 50 coppers for a single month, Master Li, Fatty Lou's father, had told him that rent would be the least of his worries should he keep this practice in the long run. And it was true, kind of. While the 50 coppers rent was not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, the flat percent 20 tax part was rather cruel to Lei's thinking. He didn't know who'd been the genius behind this flat income tax idea, but he certainly hadn't the best interest of the normal folk while coming up with it. To make matters worse, the governor's office could jerk this rate up to percent 40 should they see a need for it. At least there's no VAT or something like that. Just then, a cold sensation pricked Lei's skin. Felt like a mother's touch to him now that he knew what was really causing it. A look around the scattered crowd told him that the business hadn't been the same as when Fatty Lou worked his magic the other day, but he still had about a dozen people chewing on the loaves round the square. "I'll be taking a little break," he said when another man came up to the store, who gave him a nod before trudging away. Lei stepped back and sat on the ground, bracing himself for the pain that could come poking through his chest at any moment now. Seconds crawled past, but the pain didn't come. In fact, he felt better than ever before, probably because of the little breather he took from the constant cooking and sweating. The strange thing was, he could still feel the cold sensation. So there had to be something causing it. He used the yellow maiden's eyes to take a glance around him and then saw, much to his surprise, a flash of light coming off from the ladle that rested by the wok. "Your common ladle, poor quality, has been upgraded to a spiritual ladle, mortal rank, low grade, poor quality." "What?" Lei sprung forward, heart thumping in his chest, and took the ladle in hand. He turned and twisted the worn metal. At first, he couldn't see anything different about it, but then slowly felt that cold sensation trickling down from the ladle to his fingers, making them itch. "A spiritual tool? Are you serious?" He gave it a swing. It whistled through the air, producing a ringing sound. His fingers hurt from how hard he had to clench them around the handle just to stop the ladle from slipping out through his hold. He didn't want to bloody his hands after a good morning run, not with a ladle, at least. Lei stepped back and slammed the ladle down on the stool, which made the poor wooden logs groan and creak under its weight. A web of cracks spread from the curving edge of the damned thing, nearly breaking his lifeline in two and leaving him jobless. As usual, the system barely provided any information about his new tool. Mortal rank, sure, low grade, yeah, that was some help all right. Thankfully, his soul brother's education at the Lien clan had come with basic knowledge about spiritual tools. A mortal rank, low-grade spiritual tool was barely worth anything in the eyes of most cultivators. An average sect disciple could get a mortal rank, middle-grade tool as a welcome present from whatever sect they decided to join. But it was still a spiritual tool, and anything spiritual was better than decisively mortal in Lei's eyes. For a second he wondered if this would be how he'd rise to new heights. A ladle-swinging, soul-cooking chef who would defy the already twisted common sense of this world. That made him laugh right before it dawned on him the real implications of this function. This could mean that in time, and with great care, he could produce heavenly ladles and immortal woks with which he could truly ascend higher into the heavens to become one of the old monsters he'd often read in those novels. "I'm getting ahead of myself." He shook his head as he kept pondering on the matter. It didn't slip past his notice that this upgraded tool was the same ladle he'd used cooking that spirited fried rice the other day. So it was either charmed by the spirituality brimmed inside that glorious dish or suddenly struck with enlightenment that it could, by all means, transform into a better version of itself by simply willing it. When Lei stared intently at the ladle, he didn't see anything quite resembling a wool about it. It was a ladle through and through. So it was because of that dish. A strange thought popped into his mind. What if he cooked those spiritual dishes with a sword? Would it become a spiritual weapon that could hack through cultivators and monstrous beasts like a real treasure? If so, then it meant he could be a rich man far quicker than he'd thought. But I'm a chef. I don't think the system would have such a glaring loophole. Though it was stingy in its explanations, Lei never taught it as a broken thing he could take advantage of. Still, he made a mental note to try a sword when he'd have the chance. There's no harm in trying, right? Trial and error, simple as that. Straining to lift the ladle, which had become heavier like a 20-pound rock, Lei cooked the last batch of menemen before calling it a day. The afternoon sun slowly eased back to the west, its crimson light bouncing off of the coin pile that rested on the store. Lei secured his tools and put the ladle under the counter before counting the coppers one by one. His right eye twitched when the total came up with a grand sum of 48 coppers. Not bad, I guess. But it's time I take advantage of the drum crowds of the night. It's getting too hot for me to work my ass off for the whole morning. For that, though, he needed a new recipe. He'd chosen menemen because of its low cost. It was also a touch familiar in taste for these ancient folk. Lei found that cooking completely alien food was a wasted effort, as these people weren't that open to trying new things. On the other hand, he wasn't planning to go with the usual noodles or fried seafood like most of his competition often sold. He didn't want to lose his edge, but he had to take account of the cost before coming up with a new dish. Something with meat, maybe. The last time I checked, the prices weren't that bad. Locking the stall, Lei wiped his face with a towel and stared up at the sky. He had a good hour or two before the meeting with Fatty Lo and his shady friend, enough time for him to do a little market search. He gave a last look over the shoulder to the stall. Somehow he didn't feel right leaving the ladle in there. It was a spiritual tool, after all, even though it didn't look like it. I'll take you with me after the meeting. There were many things these ancient folk lacked. Refrigerators, your everyday tools, even a simple sink and a flush. In the month he spent here, Lei came to greatly miss those things he took for granted back on Earth. Even finding a soap could be a hurdle sometimes. But if there was one thing this ancient world had over modern times, it was the quality of basic ingredients. Everything was too organic to the point that you could almost taste the hard effort behind these ingredients, which were cultivated by great care and honest sweat. That was why he found solace in the East Market. This was his heaven on earth, a place that displayed the simplicity and authenticity of this ancient world. There were no packed foods or fluorescent lights that drilled into his soul, nor there were the tired, lifeless faces of people who hated every second they wasted in some giant building that lacked any warmth. As Lei strolled from between the stalls that stretched across the market, he couldn't help the wide smile creasing his lips. Tomatoes flashed red and green from under the thin veils, beckoning him for a taste. Beside them stood eggplants, peppers, bok choys, and broccolis, painting the stalls with a cacophony of colors. Hard faces would turn mellow whenever people inched a step closer to one of these stalls, often followed by the gentle voice of a farmer asking them if they would be interested in trying one of the ripe melons that they'd cut open, displaying the gorgeous play of colors between red and green. A single piece from that juicy wonderfulness would be enough to hook most of the customers into a heated bargain where they didn't stand a chance against these grisly workers. More often than not, these customers would leave the stall with sacks filled with melons, eggplants, and peppers, even though they'd just come for a gin of tomatoes. But when they saw Lei, those faces creased further, wary eyes staring at him as though he were a thief with the deftest of hands in this part of the city. They had learned it better to give him a piece or two after Lei filled his sacks without paying a dime. He didn't mind it. In fact, he respected their attention to detail, as it wasn't easy to remember a face when there were dozens of people crowding the place every day. Soon the fresh air gave way to the heavy stench of the animals as Lei rounded a corner. Ahead, the butcher shops came into view. The sounds of bleating goats, clucking chickens, and the occasional low of cattle dinned inside his ears, accompanied by the sharp clinks of knives on chopping boards and the rhythmic thud of cleavers splitting bone. Lei approached a familiar butcher's stall, run by a burly man named Tulaway. His pate shone under the crimson lights of the setting sun as he chopped a chicken with a deft hand, barely blinking as he readied the cuts. "Master Laway, good day," Lei said as he smiled at the man. He'd stared around, but couldn't see Fatty Lo. "Oh?" Master Laway gave him a side-eyed glance, his mouth twitching. "Little Lei, so it was you. Your bastard of a friend isn't here if you're looking for him. Said something about a friend or a business, can't remember. If you asked me, he must be out chasing some young ladies." Lei chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm actually here to buy some meat. I'm thinking of a new recipe." Master Laway's expression softened as he set aside the chicken and reached for a sizable lamb leg hanging from a hook. "Good, good. What about some lamb? Freshest one we've got. I can work with lamb." Lei nodded as he took out his coin pouch. "How much for that leg?" 50 coppers would be more than enough, Master Laway said with a strained smile. "Just for a leg?" Lei was taken aback. "The last week it was about 30, no. Courtesy of our governor." Master Laway scowled down at the lamb leg. "They've been devouring lambs and cattle over there for the last week. Don't know who's been visiting, but it can't be a nobody, tell you that much. I'm thinking some officer of the court. Is it related to the cultivator attack? Perhaps the capital did send a relief package. If so, there was not much he could do. The lamb was expensive, but it'd sell for more by that logic." "All right, I'll take 4, Lei said, then raised a hand. "But I need lean cuts, no thicker than a finger. Leave the fat and save me the bones, will you? I'll take them tomorrow morning if it's fine with you." "As you wish," Master Laway said and flourished his cleaver. Unlike Fatty Lo, who seemed he'd have horses chasing him whenever he worked here, Master Laway was careful and slow in his art. "What about this new recipe?" Master Lei asked just as Lei was about to leave. Lei smiled over his shoulder. Something from far away. A dish from my mother's side. Oh? Master Lei raised an eyebrow at him. What's it called? It has a different name depending on the region, but our folks used to call it doner kebab. Chapter 9, Deal. After securing 4 fine lamb legs, Lei made his way toward swirling fog as the sun slowly gave way to the glinting stars. The streets were packed with hundreds of people, most out to drink their worries away. Now that he thought about it, it was a touch odd to spend a night in a tea house when you could savor the wines and the beer of the local taverns. But he was a good 200 coppers lighter after buying those legs and was left with just about 100 or 2 coppers to his name. I'm not in the mood for drinking, anyway. Past the eastern square, swirling fog was as lively as usual. It wasn't hard to spot Fatty Lo, who was busy talking with a lean, tall man who had a mean scowl on his face. The scar that ran from under his right eye all the way down to the side of his mouth was interesting, but not unexpected, of course. Lei greeted Master Fen with a nod before easing onto one of the stools and laying a hand over the table. A good night, isn't it? He asked, staring Scarface up and down. I'm Lien Lei, it's a pleasure to meet you. Long He, the man said, his dark eyes glinting with interest as he glanced at him. You must be the cook, eh? The spiritual chef, is it? You did not strike me as a man who is one leg deep into the spiritual side of things, to be honest. You know, cultivators are often cracked people. Something about the energy, I've heard, that makes them mad. A strong first impression. Lei smiled as he leaned closer to him. Straight to the point. I like it. So you know your business round cultivators, then? Long He nodded. I've been a retainer once. That was some experience. He was a bastard, that cultivator was, but the pay was good, and I'd often spend days without seeing him. He holed into a cave by the dark limb forest, for closed-door meditation, I was told. But as I've gathered, you've not sought me out for anything like that, yes? Lei turned to Fatty Lo, who had a wide smile on his face. I see that you haven't told our friend about the plans. I've told him, but he didn't believe it. Fatty Lo clapped Long He on the back, pulling him closer and making the man wince. But whether he believes it or not isn't important. He'll get paid and will do the deed for us. Is he now? Lei regarded the man's qualifications with a frown. His robe looked clean, and other than that nasty scar there didn't seem anything shady about him. So tell me, Brother He, have you done anything other than being a retainer to some cultivator that you want to speak of? I'm sure you can understand that we don't want to get too much attention. Long He lifted his chin and gave him a confident look. My brother works in the Adventurers Guild as a scribe. If you want someone to trust, then I'm your best pick around this part of the town. Fatty Lo was chuckling at the side. Why bother speaking when you have a damned scribe in the guild? Well, that certainly makes it easy for us, Lei said, a little more relaxed now. Then let us talk about the missions. You must be quite knowledgeable about this stuff if you have a brother working in the guild. You want spiritual ingredients, Long He said. Lei nodded. Yes. Plants, vegetables, rice, you name it. Anything with spiritual energy will do for us. Brother Lu here told me the rewards for these missions would be paid in dishes, is that correct? Long He asked doubtfully. Don't blame me for asking, but I've never seen anything like that before. Things can get troublesome if your dishes won't satisfy the cultivators. The Adventurers Guild doesn't take kindly when people try to do something stupid. Don't worry, my stuff is the real deal, but we don't want people asking questions after eating them, Lei said. This was the crucial point. If word got around that he could cook dishes that had more or less the same effect as medicinal pills, then it wouldn't be just people who were too eager to become cultivators who'd come seeking him. Long He raised an eyebrow. Say you can truly cook spiritual dishes, then it's bound to get a great deal of questions from the cultivators who'd be eating them. The only thing we can do, as we've talked, is to keep your name out of this. What about you, though? Lei asked, staring him down. Any cultivator can fork up the knowledge out of you, don't you think? My brother is right, Fatty Lu chimed in, his hold around Long He's shoulder tightening. You've not much meat to your bones, Brother He. Even I can mess your face up. Long he trembled like a mouse stuck between two cats. Then he stared at them both strangely. What's the deal with you two? I understand that you want to be careful, but it's not like this city has hundreds of cultivators ready to kill you for just some spiritual dish. I mean, is it even real? Don't get me wrong, but I don't want to waste my time. Oh, it's real. Fatty Lou's fingers dug deep into his shoulder. The realest shit I've ever eaten, mark my words. You have to be careful about these things. Lei sighed. His knowledge about Xianxia world suggested that there was always the risk of some demonic bastard seeking a chance to mess with people's lives. He was no genius, but he knew how valuable the system's gifts were. Long his face twisted up in fear, but he gave them a nod. Don't worry. I can let my brother post the missions. Nobody will mess with him, trust me. No, Lei said, fingers of his right hand crackling as he clenched them. You going to do it, and you won't tell anyone about our little deal, right, Brother Lou? Fatty Lou flicked a finger up Lum's face, which made him nearly tumble back on his ass. He barely corrected himself before Fatty Lou closed in on him, smiling wickedly. You're damned right. Lei knew they had the man on the hook now. They were just missing a single piece before they closed all the gaps. He raised a finger at him. If you do a good enough job, who knows, maybe you can get to taste my spiritual dishes. They say even a talentless fool can become a fully fledged cultivator once they'd eaten it. Really? Long his eyes jerked wide open, a greedy glint flashing behind them. He cleared his throat and tried to gather himself. I mean, good. As I've said, you can trust me. It's a deal then. Fatty Lou slammed a hand on the table, which made the pot and the cup shake, and rose to his feet. You're to start immediately. We don't have a second to waste, brother he. Why you can count on me, Brother Lou. Long he floundered up his feet, bowed deeply, and scuttled away from the table. A moment after he stopped, turned back, and waved stupidly at Lei. It was a pleasure meeting with you, Brother Lei. Millimeter. Lei didn't bother to wave him off. After the man vanished into the crowd, they exchanged a look with Fatty Lou before bursting into laughter. It would be a lie if Lei said he hadn't enjoyed bullying the man. Did you see him go? Fatty Lou snickered. He's a fool, but an honest one, don't worry. And that scar? He'd fallen off a rooftop back when we were young, and some lantern hook caught him bad. He'd made good use of that, though, I must admit. Gives you an edge, no doubt, Lei said, and sipped from the tea before frowning in thought. You think it'll really work? Fatty Lou looked confident. He's not wrong, you know. Jianjin doesn't have many cultivators in the first place, and those who had the fortune to become cultivators mostly work for the governor's office. We have to thank the Empire for that one. Wait, why? Lei asked. There's a law that forbids the cultivator clans from residing in cities that have under 100,000 people. It makes you feel fortunate after seeing how things get nasty in places like Lanzhou. There must be over 100 cultivator clans in that place. That I know. I was from one of those clans, you see. I don't know about Lanzhou, but Jianjin can't be considered the safest place either. People seem to forget, but it's been just a month after that cultivator attack. Nearly half the eastern part of the city had been razed to ground. Fatty Lou's face darkened. It's not that people forget, Brother Lei, they're just trying to carry on with their lives. If there's a person to blame, we should blame the governor for his lack of thought in this matter. I've never seen that man, but Master Li seems to hate him with passion. Is he that bad? The worst, Fatty Lou said. The bastard sees this city as his backyard. You know the saying that goes, the walls have eyes, right? Well, that's him. He owns the walls and all the soil beneath our feet. Everybody knows how corrupted he is, but people fear change more. Lei nodded. That was hardly anything new. The same was true even back on Earth, where people had all the information, but still chose the familiar ones over the new guys. Guess I can't blame them. All the old ones, the so-called pillars of the country, were once new faces people had high hopes for. What does it matter changing into a new bastard? Well, let's just hope he keeps the taxes this way, Lei said, and gulped away the tea in his cup. A second after, Fatty Lou was staring at him, chewing on his lower lip as though he was hesitating to speak. Just as Lei was about to tell him to go on, the man breathed in deep and spilled the beans. That bun of yours. Have you made any progress on that front? Lei smiled slightly, seeing to his eyes that his brother was having some withdrawal symptoms. That wasn't surprising. It's not every day that you get high on spiritual energy, after all. If you're asking whether I can turn normal ingredients into spiritual ones, then no, nothing new on that side. We still need spiritual ingredients. But the other day I found out a curious thing. Is that so? Yeah, Lei said, his smile growing wide. Turns out those brats around the ruins had a real knack for cultivation. They'd licked my place clean after we passed out, and seems like 3 of the kids had stepped into the ranks of body tempering stage experts. Fatty Lou's eyes twitched, mouth gaping wide open as he stared at him. What did you say? I said that 3 of those kids had become cultivators, Lei said, then snapped his fingers. Just like that. What in the 18 hells? Fatty Lou wiped the spit trickling out from the side of his mouth and poured himself some tea. He chugged 1 cup after another before finally gathering enough breath to speak. This isn't fair. Nothing's fair in this world, Brother Lou. Lei shook his head. But I guess karma is real. That's a good thing, right? They lost their parents but were blessed with talent. Makes you think if there's really some higher being watching us mortals from over the heavens. Some sick bastard, that's who he is. Can't argue with that, Lei said, drumming a finger on the table. We have to do something. Can't let them live in the ruins anymore. I can go check the orphanage. No, not the orphanage, Lei cut him instantly. That place already had dozens of children who suffered from the sudden attack. I'm thinking of a new recipe for tomorrow night. A new recipe? Thought that Miniman is doing good, no. Well, it is good, but I think trying new things will help with my gift, Lei said. It still felt odd talking about the system as it didn't feel real at times. I bought some good lamb meat from Master Luwei before coming here. You bought what now? Fatty Lou almost gasped. Why didn't you tell me? At least I would have given you a discount. You're always talking as if you own the place, but we both know Master Luwei hates your guts, Lei said tiredly. If it weren't for Master Li, he would have fired your ass long ago. So spare me that hurt look. I mean, do you even work there at all? Not that I complain, but you're always with me. Fatty Lou shook his head, greatly disturbed by the mention of that butcher shop as always. That place sucks your soul. It's different. Anyway, if he wants to fire me, he can do whatever the hell he wants. It's not like I need that job. We'll become real cultivators soon. Soon, you say? Let's hope things go smoothly for us. Figure something out while I ready the dish tomorrow. The last time the thing with that heavenly master was really good, but I need a whole new campaign. I've paid 200 coppers for those legs. Fatty Lou sucked in a sharp breath. 200 coppers. All right, let me see what can I do. Lei nodded. It was good that they were on the right track with the spiritual ingredients, but to save those children from the ruins and himself from that wrecked house, he'd be needing more than 200 coppers. That was why he had to prepare a bunch of things tomorrow. Chapter 10, Time to Cook. The next day Lei sent Stone and Snake to fetch him the lamb cuts and milk from the market, giving them some extra coin as he knew those little devils couldn't help themselves in a place full of food and candies. After that, he took Little Maya and a bunch of others for a short stroll around the ruins where he gathered enough wooden logs for his grand venture. He could just cook the chops straight over on a grill and that would be tasty enough. But taste alone, Lei found, wasn't enough to get the attention of the masses. He needed that extra touch, something flashy in Fatty Lou's words, if he wanted to charge over 10 coppers for half a bread. It wasn't like him to try a big gambit like this. Back on Earth, he'd spent most of his life taking account of all the possibilities, thinking too deeply of what IFS and whatnots to the point that he hardly spent a dime on other than basic necessities. Even when he was out drinking with some friends, he'd always be thinking about the way back, the traffic, the crowds, until he'd turned the whole night into its own hell. Crashing into a building certainly clears one's mind. Makes you think about all those decisions, no doubt. Now that he'd been blessed with a second chance, he had the mind to be a little more courageous than his old self. Take his chances rather than thinking too much about it, sort of. That was the reason why, rather than going with tacos and burritos, which would have saved him the trouble of laboring through the morning with these wooden planks, he opted for a dish that would easily get the attention of these ancient folk. It was a big stick, after all, and it would be full of meat. Who would turn a blind eye to this marvel of the culinary field? Not me. Feels like years since the last time I tried one of these. He cut and shaped the wooden logs until he was satisfied with the result. He used a round piece as a base before fixing a spit on it which came near about his waist. Luckily, the kids found some metal parts around the ruins, though Lei was horrified when Little might easily bent those parts into square containers that would house the firewood with which the kebab would be cooked slowly. It took all the morning, but Lei was more than proud of the final product. Sure, it could be a little cleaner and maybe he could have tried to find a real spit than this metal stick, but these were simpler times. The noon sun was high in the heavens and sending streaks of bloody light down the ruins when Snake and Stone came with his orders and some more. Lei left them alone with the candies they'd bought from the market, which sparked an intense bout amongst the other kids, and took the meat cuts inside. As always, Master Luwei didn't disappoint, as all the cuts were around 1 finger thick and not longer than his hand. He poured the milk into one of the big basins, adding pepper, salt, garlic, cumin, and a pinch of mint. The mixture slowly changed into a thickish, brown color. Once that was done, Lei then eased the fillets into the basin and left them to marinate over the noon. On the side, he had his lemons and vinegar waiting for him. He cracked an egg and slipped its yolk into a small bowl, whipping it up before adding a bit of lemon juice, some vinegar, and a pinch of salt. We didn't have enough money, okay? I promise I'll buy you some next time, came Snake's voice from the outside. Then the little brat chuckled. Or you can always ask Big Brother Lei for more. Just then Lei felt eyes on his back. A look at the bowl gave him an idea, so he gestured for Little Mai to come closer. She had that curious glint in her eyes as she watched him whipping the mixture. Little Mai, do you want to help me? Lei asked with a smile. Little Mai nodded vigorously as her eyes stayed glued to the bowl. All right, keep whipping it while I add some oil. Don't stop unless I tell you, understood? Lei stifled a laugh when the girl's face creased with absolute focus. As Little Mai started working the mixture, Lei grabbed a bottle from the side, which was filled with a dark golden-colored liquid that had a mild, nutty smell about it. Lei was rather doubtful if cottonseed oil would be a good fit for the mayonnaise, but it was the most neutral-tasting oil he'd managed to find. Somebody has to come up with sunflower oil soon, or even olive oil. They have tomatoes, so there are clearly some differences from the real ancient times. Sign, Lei poured the oil into the mixture, nodding to Little Mai when she gave him a strange look. After a couple of minutes, the mixture got thick enough to dip a finger into it. Want to try? Lei asked as Little Mai put the bowl on the table. She didn't seem that eager to try, so Lei tried it first. The texture was smooth and velvety, and it had an acidic kick to it. It can use a little bit of mustard, but it's quite good for a simple recipe. Little Mai shuffled impatiently as Lei savored the taste of mayonnaise and finally couldn't help but dip a finger into the mix. She sucked on her finger for some time, then she scowled. Lei, this thing is too strange, she said, licking her lips. I've never eaten anything like this before. Oh, is that so? Lei smiled knowingly. Back where I came from they love this stuff. It's called mayo over there. We'll be saucing our breads up with it. Little Mai nodded, then stared up at him. Where did you come from, Lei? You never tell us anything about yourself. Some place far away from here. Lei tousled her hair. Did they kill your parents, too? Little Mai asked. Is that why you have to come here? Lei blinked at her. His parents should be still alive, but there was no way of him knowing if it had been really just a month after his death. For all he knew, there could be hundreds of years between his death and the reincarnation. I don't know, Lei said, shaking his head. He'd spent many sleepless nights thinking about them before finally accepting there was nothing he could do. On some level, he wasn't that different from the people of Jiangxin. He was trying to carry on, to put up a brave front, but there were times it had become a touch too hard to accept that he'd lost all the 30 years he'd spent back on Earth. Perhaps one day I can go back. But at least we have each other now, right, Lei? Little Mai said, making Lei flinch when she patted him on the leg as though trying to console him. Guess he is not too bad either. Past afternoon, Lei finished stacking the fillets into the spit, slapping the sides to make sure they were packed tightly together. He slipped parts of the tail fat between the layers and over on the spit, which would slowly melt with the heat, coating over the layers with delicious juice. He covered the kebab with a cloth to keep away the flies and the bugs and the children hopping around the house like curious bunnies. Lei assured them that they would get their fill, but that didn't seem to have done anything but make them more excited. Stone and Snake, come here, Lei said, pointing a finger to the platform. You two will help me carry this stick to the square. The others will take the containers. I need all the hands with me tonight, understood? After a nod from his little teen, they started for the eastern square. The metal platform and the firewood packed inside the containers could easily break a man's back, but while Lei was sweating like a dog under the setting sun, Stone and Snake seemed like they were having the time of their life. Why didn't you cook them right away? Did you do something to the stick? Is that why you worked hard all the morning? Isn't mixing milk with meat disgusting? Why would you do that? Can't you cook it here? Do we really have to wait before we get to the square? Lei tried to blow some cold breath into his robe as he was assaulted by questions from all around. Some of them didn't even make sense, but taking a deep breath, he addressed them one by one, his voice calm and patient. All right, listen up, the inner chef inside of him spoke with strength. We didn't cook the kebab right away because we want all the customers to see the process of its cooking, and we want that delicious smell spreading around the square to get their attention. As for the milk, Lei continued, we soaked the fillets in the spiced-up milk for maximum marinade penetration to make them more tender and give them some extra flavor. It's an important step, so if there's anyone amongst you who wants to be a chef like your big brother here, take your notes and pay heed to my words. And yes, Lei responded to the last question, you will have to wait for your fill, because I've nearly spent all my money on this land, hoping it'll earn me enough to put a real roof over your heads. So be good when we're in the square, is that understood? They nodded to his words, but Lei knew it'd take just a minute or so before they forgot the real reason for this venture. Well, you have to let kids be kids, right? Sighing, Lei motioned for Stone and Snake to continue carrying the stick, while the others followed with the containers. Lei himself took another breath to gather his mind. Even though his arms strained with the effort, he felt a sense of satisfaction as the line of little cooks made their way to the eastern square. Little cooks. I've been there once. They trudged through the crowds, curious gazers trailing them. When they arrived at the square, Lei was taken aback to see the stools and tables that had been laid before his stall. He raised an eyebrow at a certain fatty who slumped over on a table, drops of sweat heavy on his brows, fanning himself with one hand. There was a sack full of bread near him. Looks like you've been busy, Brother Lou, Lei said with a grin as he approached. Fatty Lou chuckled, wiping his brow with a sleeve. You know how it is, brother. Gotta make sure everything's just right for the big night. That you're right. Lei nodded and gestured to Snake and Stone to put the doner kebab near the stall. They then placed the wooden containers near the stick and sat around a table. You've called the heavyweights, eh? Fatty Lou said as he stared at Stone and Snake with clear doubt. Those little arms. I still can't believe it. I guess there is a good reason why people are willing to risk their lives to become a cultivator, Lei said. That's just bad business if you ask me. Fatty Lou shook his head. Life isn't a race where there is a clear finish line. Better to give your days meaning than chase some faraway goal only to start the circle once again. For me, I don't want much. A little place by some immortal city, wine, food, and enough women to spend the days. That's what I'm thinking. Lei raised an eyebrow at him. That's very wise of you, brother. I'm a wise man. Fatty Lou snickered, then shrugged. Not often, though. We all have good and bad days, don't you think? We do, Lei said, peering out into the people crowding the square. There were around a dozen or so stalls preparing for the night, and not all of them had friendly faces behind them. Lei could feel their questioning gazes on the back of his head. He turned to Fatty Lou. I hope you've not wasted all your wisdom pondering on the grand puzzle that is life. We'll be needing some of that here tonight. Fatty Lou snorted. This young master here knows his business quite well, don't you worry. While you were cooking your dishes, I've been cooking a devious plan that'd grab these bastards by their balls. They won't know what hit them, trust me. Oh, care to elaborate? Snake, Stone, come here. Fatty Lou snapped his head back at the kids and glared out into their eyes before winking at Lei. I'll be taking these devils with me. Wait, what is the plan? You'll see. Fatty Lou gave him a mysterious smile. With that, he took the kids and vanished into the crowd, leaving Lei speechless and with a heap of questions clouding his mind. A look up at the heavens reminded him of the time, so he rose to his feet and took his place by the store. All right, kids, it's time for some cooking.